Hello everyone and welcome to Extreme Academy Live Expert Talk. Today we are joined by our Wi-Fi expert David Coleman discussing the top questions around wireless technologies. We recorded this previously with David and Dave, but they are now here live to join us to answer any of your questions in the Q&A. So feel free to ask anything that you want either in the chat, LinkedIn or YouTube. To help support your studies, we have also a free downloadable document that you can use. You just need to click the link in the description to access that. Now let's get straight to it. Over to you, Dave.
So hi David, good to see you again. Thanks for coming over to spend some time with us.
Happy to be here, Dave.
What we've done is we've gathered some questions from the field, from our customers, from our partners, from our internal teams, all about wireless LAN and Wi-Fi. We want to take advantage of your expertise to give us some answers while you're here. So first up, 6 gigahertz. Lots and lots to talk about 6 gigahertz wireless LAN, lots of activity around that. Really wanted some guidance from you on when it should be adopted, when the time is right, and really what are the considerations around that move towards 6 gigahertz?
Well, I've actually been talking about what I call the era of 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi connectivity for about 2.5 years now, but we're still in the cusp, at the very beginning of it, and it's all about regulatory and being able to have this new frequency band available to us for Wi-Fi connectivity. And I really view it as a paradigm shift because it's in some countries like North America, Canada, and the United States, is 1,200 megahertz of frequency space, which is double what we've had before. In Europe, it's currently about 480 megahertz, but we hope to get more in the future as well. At the end of the day, anybody that is looking in the future to future-proof their network, I believe the future of Wi-Fi actually will ride on the superhighway of 6 gigahertz. So in my mind, if somebody's thinking about the refresh cycle in terms of upgrading, they need to be thinking about 6 gigahertz connectivity, whether that's Wi-Fi 6E or Wi-Fi 7.
So building on that, David, on that 6 gigahertz answer, what are some of the considerations around building and planning for tri-band networks to include that 6 gigahertz spectrum?
Okay, well, once again, I'll reiterate that it's where you are in your refresh cycle. And if it's time to refresh, you absolutely should be thinking about 6 gigahertz. But there's clearly some considerations. Probably the first question I get asked is, can I do one-to-one replacements? Can I just rip down my old Wi-Fi 5 or Wi-Fi 6 AP and put up an AP that has a 6 gigahertz radio in it? Well, traditionally, one-to-one replacements are not really a good idea. It depends. Some customers, that's maybe their only option. But at the end of the day, the 6 gigahertz frequency is going to have a little bit shorter range than 5 gigahertz. So, which has kind of been, in terms of effective range, the common denominator in the past. 6 gigahertz is going to be a little bit smaller. So they need to be thinking about that. Additionally, is from the client side, the clients are actually also going to have to operate at a 6 dB below what the APs operate, at least in North America. Not going to have quite that problem in Europe, but where I'm getting at, it's going to be shorter range. So they're going to have, at the end of the day, whenever you do a refresh, you should always design and validate. And I've been saying that for many, many years. So even if you attempt to do a one-to-one replacement, design and validate. Now, there's two other things I think they should think about too, and that is the wired integration too. As with Wi-Fi 6E and with Wi-Fi 7, I really think we're finally to the point where multi-gig is going to be a reality. So, traditionally, a 1 gig uplink from your AP to your switch was more than enough. Where it's been corner cases where that's been a bottleneck. That's probably finally starting to change. So at the end of the day, you need to think about your wired network and infrastructure as well, and upgrading that for multi-gig, for future-proofing purposes. And secondly, even the more important part of that conversation is PoE. So moving forward, we're putting more radios into APs. The days of AF, 802.3 AF, 15 watts of power are over. At a minimum, you're going to need PoE plus and 25 watts. In some cases, for full functionality of an AP, you're going to need up to 32 or more watts, so 802.3 BT power. So that's a very big consideration, making sure that you have the proper power budgets. And the last thing I'll say about this is 6 gigahertz is an opportunity. You don't necessarily need to design and do everything that you've done with Wi-Fi before in 2.4 and 5 gigahertz the exact same way. I like to challenge customers and partners to think out of the box. Maybe it'll be more application driven. Maybe you have bandwidth intensive or mission critical applications running on the 6 gigahertz band. Or you're doing things with 6 gigahertz with Wi-Fi that you've never done before. So view it as an opportunity as opposed to more of the same.
So moving on a little bit, look at security. So also lots of talk about WPA3.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the considerations and the planning, and really when should customers be looking to move towards WPA3?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that, because 6 gigahertz in itself is actually going to drive wider adoption of WPA3 because it's mandated for 6 gigahertz connectivity. There is no WPA2 in 6 gigahertz, and you always want to strive to have the best and strongest security when it comes to wireless or wired networking. So it's been a mandate for WPA3 for 6 gigahertz. What does that mean, though, for the legacy bands? And that's where the question gets a little tricky, because WPA3 has actually been around for about 4 years now, but it hasn't been widely adopted in the 2.4 or 5 band simply because a lot of the legacy drivers had connectivity problems. That's changing. If you're using WPA3 Enterprise with what is called transition modes on the legacy bands, that's a fancy word or phrase for backwards compatibility. So being able on a single SSID to support WPA2 and WPA3 at the same time on the legacy bands works pretty good on enterprise with 802.1x connectivity. As a matter of fact, statistically, we're seeing that well over 95% of clients will connect with no problem if you enable the backward compatibility capabilities. So if they're newer clients, they'll connect with WPA3. Older clients will connect with WPA2. Now it's a little bit different when you start talking about WPA3 personal and turning on the transition modes for WPA2 personal. It's two completely different protocols. You're talking about the user experience is the same. It's just they're typing in a passphrase, but you're talking about a PSK, one protocol that uses PSK and another one that uses something called SAE, so Secure Authentication of Equals. Because of that, we've seen some issues with connectivity and on the backwards connectivity, so I'm not really prepared to give the guidance to use those transition modes right now on the legacy bands. But if you're using personal on 6 gigahertz, you have to, because there is no WPA2. With time, we hope that as we move forward, you'll use WPA3 on all 3 bands, and over time, kind of phase out WPA2. And then the last thing I should bring up is open networks. Open networks have traditionally been used a lot for guest networks. Not really a good idea, because at the end of the day, you have an unencrypted network and you have no authentication. There is an answer for that. It's called enhanced open. Enhanced open is half of the equation. It's encryption, but no authentication. So that's starting to grow. It's also supported on 6 gigahertz, and it's supported on the legacy bands with transition modes as well. Some customers may want to use that, although I'm still kind of a big believer in our PPSK solution, which is a WPA2 solution, but currently that's more of a 2.4 and 5 gigahertz solution. Just to summarize all this, WPA3 is growing. It's mandated in 6 gigahertz, and the adoption is growing quite fast now in 2.4 and 5.
So what are the obstacles for implementing standard power globally and in the US?
Well, That, it's interesting you ask that because it's not really an obstacle. It's more of a technology challenge, and that's something called automated frequency coordination, which is something we've never used in Wi-Fi before. So right now there are what we call existing incumbents that transmit in 6 gigahertz already, like fixed satellite services, and we are not allowed to interfere with them. So to operate a standard power AP, whether it's outdoors or indoors, we basically have to ask permission first so that we don't interfere with the incumbents. So what an AP will do is it will contact what is called an AFC service provider and say, I want to use this channel and this power level. Can I do it? And then that AFC provider will check a known regulatory database. And if that AP is not going to interfere with anybody, it will say, yeah, go ahead, use that channel. Or if it's potentially interfering with an incumbent, it'll say, no, you need to lower your power and maybe change to a different channel. So it's kind of a proactive way of making sure that we don't interfere with the existing transmitters that are out there in 6 gigahertz. And so this is about to happen very shortly in the United States. I mean, like I said earlier, it's imminent. Now, your original question was, well, what about the rest of the world? We'll see. Honestly, there's a whole drive to what is called spectrum harmonization. I think one of the first things we really need to happen right here, for example, in Europe, there's only 480 megahertz of frequency space dedicated for LPI power. Well, and indoors use, well, we need all 1200. So worldwide, ideally, we want to have 1200 megahertz of frequency space available for everybody. Then when you start talking about standard power, it's not as much frequency space and it's a different set of rules, okay? And then you add in the whole automated frequency coordination. That's going to be different per region and different per country. It's going to take some time in some regions. It's actually taken longer than we thought it would in the United States. So I can't really make predictions because we're talking about government here. I think we'll get there eventually, but it could be a couple of years.
Fascinating stuff. The mixture of technology and regulation is always an interesting mix, I can see. So let's move on to backwards, I suppose, to some extent. Think about 2.4 gigahertz. I've had some personal experience recently with IoT devices on 2.4 gigahertz in environments where there was no 2.4 gigahertz available, for example. So I know there's some considerations here. What are your thoughts on 2.4 gigahertz, the future? Can this be disabled? How long is that environment going to last?
Well, at the end of the day, Wi-Fi was designed where it could actually operate on any frequency. It started out on 2.4, then we had 5 gigahertz, and now we're moving into the era of 6 gigahertz connectivity. And we will, I think, in the future see Wi-Fi operate in higher frequencies and lower frequencies in the future. But specifically to your question about 2.4, well, that's where Wi-Fi got started, 25 plus years ago, and a whopping 3 channels, that you could, usable channels that you could use. Look, sometimes 2.4 gigahertz is referred to as a junk band. I think it's more of a best effort band. In the enterprise, you would not want to be running your enterprise applications anymore in the 2.4 band. Can you turn it off? We've had customers who have effectively done that, where they've completely disabled 2.4 gigahertz. But that's if they can mandate the client population. And very often that is not feasible, because somebody might be bringing in some old legacy device that still supports only 2.4, or they still has, as you said, IoT devices that only have cheap 2.4 radios in them. So it's kind of hard to just completely get rid of the 2.4 band. And I'm not sure if it was really designed to be get rid of, but I guess the bigger thing is 5 gigahertz is where we've built a foundation of enterprise connectivity on. In the last 10 years, 6 gigahertz is our next opportunity, but 2.4 gigahertz is still there for legacy equipment that you might still have around, and for IoT devices that simply don't have the more advanced radios in them.
No, okay, great, understood. I think I still have a 2.4 gigahertz PCMCIA card at home, believe it or not.
Yeah, I have many of those. Many of those.
Shifting gears a little bit, David, how about we talk about roaming technologies? We hear lots of talk about different roaming solutions. Open roaming comes up in conversation, I think, quite a bit recently. I know we're part of that consortia. What are your thoughts around roaming technologies and solutions?
Well, first of all, roaming's at the heart of Wi-Fi. I mean, so why has our culture even adopted Wi-Fi and embraced Wi-Fi over the last 25 years? Well, it's mobility, right? You don't have to walk around with an Ethernet cord behind you everywhere you go. Now you're free to go throughout your house or your workplace or wherever you're at and have that seamless, frictionless, and secure wireless connectivity. And that's why we've really embraced it as a society. Now, roaming can sometimes be tricky with Wi-Fi. And over the years, in the early days of Wi-Fi, it wasn't that great, to be honest with you. But over the years, it's gotten better. Specifically, in the last 10 years or so, we've really implemented a lot of 802.11k and 802.11v mechanisms where clients and APs are communicating a little bit, sharing information with each other about how to effectively roam to the next hop, and a two-way conversation. Additionally, it gets even more complex when you start talking about layer 3 roaming, if you roam across layer 3 boundaries, and that's where 802.11r comes into place, and that is supported and can work if done properly. So now, that being said, we're always looking to improving roaming, and I think what you'll see in the future will be the various alliances and the IEEE try to figure out how can we make that roaming and seamless and secure experience be completely faster with latency of well under 20 milliseconds has always been the goal. And, excuse me, you know, in other words, a great user experience and try so that once again, the end user doesn't even know you're roaming, but has that capability. And so there's always room for improvement. Now, you did mention one other thing, and that is open roaming. That's more of a kind of a federated alliance of companies that for secure and seamless 802.1x access for public networks, like think government or public areas, stadiums, Extreme Networks, part of the whole open roaming initiative. And especially, we're seeing a lot of implementation and growth on that side in Europe, and it's starting to find its way and growing in North America. So think of it this way: think of you get some credentials that are you connect to a public network using 802.1x connectivity, WPA 2 or 3. You connect, and then when you go to some completely different network somewhere else, you connect, and you don't have to enter in credentials or, God forbid, a captive web portal. And that's, at the end of the day, the goal, to make it like a happy user experience. You know, does anybody like captive web portals? When you log into a captive web portal, do you like that experience?
Never.
Well, that's what open roaming is all about, right? It's just to make it so wherever you go, you get on, it's fast, and it's secure. And so, got a long ways to go, but we do believe in it, and it is growing globally.
So how about 5G, David? Lots to talk about 5G. I'm often using it on my latest phone that I acquired recently. How do you see 5G and Wi-Fi interoperating and interrelating in the future?
Nah, I think that 5G stuff is a bunch of voodoo. No, just kidding. So, you know, honestly, I get asked that question a lot of different ways. And a lot of times I hear a lot of hypos, 5G is going to replace Wi-Fi. And that's just nonsense. We view them as technologies that are cooperative, not necessarily competitive. It's a complex conversation because when you're talking about 5G, there's multiple kinds of 5G. Is it the public macro 5G that you're used to that on your smartphones, where you're just connecting to your cellular company? Or is it typically in this conversation, we're talking about private 5G, where you own your own 5G network for your enterprise. And so when you're talking about Wi-Fi versus private 5G, that's where the conversation usually goes. All the analysts predicted that private 5G was just going to go crazy and very, very fast. Well, it hasn't really quite panned out that way. It's been a little bit more of a niche where we're seeing in some verticals some success with it, like industrial and manufacturing. And I don't want you to think that I'm throwing private 5G under the bus. We view that there's a place for it. It just hasn't quite grown at the rate that all the analysts thought it would be. And it certainly hasn't hurt enterprise Wi-Fi. As a matter of fact, if you look at the trajectory, if you see private 5G going like in this hockey stick, Wi-Fi is even the bigger hockey stick. Or they're parallel with each other. So you're not seeing private 5G go like that and Wi-Fi go down. It's more like this. And in other words, they might be competitive in a very, very small space. But if we do have customers that might end up adopting private 5G for whatever reason, they're still going to use Wi-Fi too. And then eventually, maybe there'll actually be some convergence. But when I hear some people say things like, private 5G is going to replace Wi-Fi, that's just crazy talk. And and at the end of the day, there's also other wireless technologies too, right? There's that you use in your enterprise. There's all the IoT wireless technologies. There's BLE, Bluetooth, and there's more on the way, Zigbee and Thread and others. So. And let's not forget about wired networks too. Look, wireless networking provides typically 75% of the data that enters into your corporate network comes over Wi-Fi. And then the number goes up even more if you add other wireless technologies to that. And then there's still copper. So there's always wire somewhere. You're plugging that AP has an Ethernet cable connected to it. So at the end of the day, there's connectivity a lot of different ways, and it's all about how you can manage them all and converge them all under one platform.
So clearly, technology is moving on at a fast pace here. The access point technology, wireless LAN technology in general, moving at a fast pace, and the capabilities are forever increasing and enhancing. How does that affect the need for site surveys? Is that something that's still needed? Is a site survey still an important part of the wireless LAN and Wi-Fi deployment process?
Absolutely. Over the years, Wi-Fi has gotten better and better and better, but it's also gotten more complex. And it's, RF bounces around. It's not an bounded medium like a copper cable, Ethernet cable. Every environment's different. Which is why you need site surveys, I don't even like necessarily the word site surveys. I like to think of it really as kind of a two-part process. A predictive model where you're designing and based on your floor plans and the wall materials and things like that, and as well as your customer needs, what their requirements are after you've established the customer requirements. And what the Wi-Fi network's supposed to be used for is to design a predictive model to meet all your coverage and capacity and mobility needs. So that's the first part, okay? Establish what the Wi-Fi network's for, customer requirements, and then develop that model using all kinds of predictive tools that are out there like Ekahau or Hamina and multiple other type third-party tools. And then just as important is the validation. So post-deployment is probably more what a site survey has become, and that is validating your model and making sure that you have the proper coverage, that you're meeting your bandwidth needs and your mobility needs, and doing that on-site validation post-deployment, which is very, very critical, and making a few tweaks if necessary.
And I think you just hinted at this side of things as well. How do you visualize that environment? It feels like the visualization of that is very important, both for that validation and the tweaks, and also for the ongoing management.
Yeah, so, all the predictive tools, as well as the post-management tools like Extreme Cloud IQ, all use some sort of RF visualization of heat maps. And so if you think about it, maps in general have been used in all kinds of software platforms. So think about Google Maps or even Apple Maps. I promise you use those daily for your commute and how you get around. Or think about using an Uber or a Lyft. You're using maps in software, those software programs as well, daily, okay? Same thing in networking management. There's always been topology maps. RF maps are a little bit different. They're heat maps that can show proper coverage and capabilities, but they are built in to the predictive tools that I mentioned. And just as important is post-deployment and whatever RF monitoring platform you have, be it via the cloud or on-prem or whatever, having the ability to visualize your RF environment and is very, very important. And I think we're starting to see some advances in next generation technologies and how we can visualize RF in the future.
Great. Thanks, David. That's been really informative. I've learned an awful lot during this conversation. So much appreciate your time and thank you very much.
My pleasure, my friend.
Thank you.
Okay.